Welcome back to All That Matters Online, day one. It is a long race we have ahead, and appropriate that we're interviewing today the CEO of Formula E, Jamie Reigle, an old friend of the event, who's coming in live from Hong Kong today. For those of you who are not race fans, don't know too much about Formula E, it launched its first ever season in 2014 around the Olympic Park in the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing. It's just concluded its sixth season, holding 6 races in 9 days in Berlin. They're getting ready for season 7, underway in Santiago in January 2021. Season 7 is the first season as an FIA World Championship. So, Jamie Reigle, brilliant to have you back. Welcome to All That Matters.
Thanks very much, Jasper. It's fantastic to be here, and super honored to be invited. I think I was at the first or maybe the second Sports Matters back in 2013 timeframe in Singapore. So, long fan of these conferences, and really exciting to be here. And you did a nice job giving a summary of what Formula E is all about. Actually, yesterday we celebrated the anniversary of the first race. The first race was in Beijing yesterday, 6 years ago. So quite a milestone for us. Very short period of history relative to some of the other sports properties, but pretty cool for us. So it's great to be here.
Well, and you know, obviously this is usually the Singapore F1 Grand Prix week as well. So it's great to have you here. Actually, the last time we saw you was in China at Sports Connect in Shenzhen, at Mission Hills, in 2018. Now we're in 2020. Then you were running Manchester United in Asia Pacific. Take us through your career in the last couple of years.
Well, so we spent 5 or 6 years in Asia, as you said. So came over here in 2012 to set up the Hong Kong office for Man United. Obviously, the club were incredibly popular already, so we were trying to come over here and build out a business and just have more touch points locally. And very quickly discovered that it's a very big place, and we were probably naive about the scope of that challenge, which maybe we can talk about some of those themes later. I am a huge fan of Hong Kong. My wife's based here now. My wife and my family we're here. I'm sitting in Hong Kong right now, but I was offered an opportunity to move to Los Angeles, which was quite a special opportunity with the LA Rams. So the opportunity to start up a new franchise, an NFL franchise in one of the biggest markets, and build a big stadium there funded by Mr. Kroenke, which actually opened this morning or last night, Sunday night. They played against the Cowboys in front of 0 people in a 70,000 seat stadium that took about $5 billion of capital to build. So if that doesn't talk about the world we live in right now, I don't know what does. And then, I was very happy in Santa Monica. We were leading a very nice life living in Los Angeles, but was approached by Formula E, and it was one of those chances that I really felt like I had to snatch at. And Formula E is unique in the sense that it was founded with purpose. And what I mean by that is, it's a sport, and you touched on the fact that we'll be a world championship next year. Which is a big deal in the world of car racing. There's only a handful of world championships. Of course, F1 is one of them. World Rally, World Endurance Championship. So to be elevated to that level is a big deal. And I was approached to partner with Alejandro Agag, who is an incredible entrepreneur and built Formula E from nothing against a lot of pushback and skepticism around the potential for electric vehicles generally, and certainly for the possibility of building a sport around that. And what was appealing to me, it was the opportunity to build a sport, but one with a really important message around climate change that's relevant globally. And I think in today's world around marketing and partnerships and sports marketing, purpose is a really important term, and we have that embedded in our product. And so it's been a good ride. Crazy first year.
So we're gonna drill down into a little bit more into Formula E and your role as well. Before that, I should have mentioned earlier, we are going to be taking questions from the floor. So this is normally where we'd ask people to put their hands up, but please put questions into the message window and someone will pick them up. and feed them to us. So Jamie, before we go into just talk a little bit more about you, let's talk about Formula E. Again, for the non-racing fan, how does it work? How many teams? How do the races work? What happens at a Formula E weekend?
Well, so we're often defined in the context of another very large global open wheel electric car racing series. So I'll try to give a little more nuance on why we're different. So first off, we're electric. So the cars are 100% battery powered and have a performance level that's pretty incredible. Top speed 280 kilometers an hour. The race lasts about 45 minutes, which is the capacity of the battery at that level right now. We race in cities, so it's really about a storytelling narrative around the power of sport, and particularly motorsport, around the future of urban mobility. So how do humans get around in urban environments where pollution and emissions are some of the most challenged? And so we race in cities as a way to bring the product to make it accessible to people who are most impacted by climate change. In terms of teams, we have 12 teams, and where we're really distinct is we have, depending on how you measure it, 8 to 10 manufacturers. So 8 to 10 big car companies are participating in our sport. Most recognizably, the big four German auto manufacturers. It's the first time they've ever raced together in a single series in their over 100-year history as companies. So BMW, Porsche, Mercedes, and Audi are all in our championship. Nissan in Japan, NIO in China, Mahindra in India, DS, which is part of the PSA Citroën group in France, and Jaguar, and I always forget one or two in there. So it really has a global footprint and some iconic names in motorsport who view us as, in simple terms, a tool to do R&D around their electric vehicle fleet. And you'll see very clearly in the next 3 to 5 years all of those manufacturers making a huge push. Of course, most people are very familiar with Tesla and the impact they've had on the market. I think they're the 5th most valuable market cap company in the world today. So if that gives you a flavor for certainly how the financial markets think about the potential around EVs, these guys are making really big bets on the technical side. And then we're also a marketing platform for them. So we're a storytelling platform. We use the sport to inspire and get people excited about electric vehicles.
We'll come on to your partnerships in a bit, but how has Formula E evolved in the last few months? I mean, I mentioned that you did a number of races 6 races over 9 days in Germany, but how has Formula E evolved since you joined, I guess?
Right. So, I'm not alone in this. The interesting thing, and anyone who's listening, whether you're in the live events business, whether you're in the sports business, whether you're in the music business, the concert business, we've all been pretty significantly impacted in a way that, even the worst prognostications could never have imagined before last February. So we're all in it together, so to speak. We were fortunate in the sense that we'd completed 5 races by March. But equally, we've been managing with COVID for a long time. So our race in Hainan province in China was scheduled for March. We canceled that in February because we knew there was a virus that was going to restrict our ability to host an event in China in the winter. So we've been managing through this, and I think the key watchword has really just been around adaptability and flexibility. I would say there was a period in March where, when I define my job as working in the live events business in the automotive industry, literally there wasn't a live event happening, and there were fewer cars sold around the world in April than any time since 1945. And so, the two worlds we were living in were pretty dramatically impacted. And we had to adapt, right? So we looked at ways to engage our fans in that context. We put on an esports series, which we can talk about if that's of interest. And then the primary, responsibility and focus was how do we complete our season in a way that is safe for our fans, responsible for the communities we're operating in, allows us to crown a champion, and hopefully deliver some value for our fans and our partners. So that's where we came up with the idea for Berlin. To put it in context, historically, motorsport, tends to happen with, at least a week or 2 weeks between each race, plenty of time for preparation, plenty of time for the narratives to build. We tried to do 6 races in 9 days, which had never been done before, but that led to a pretty cool media product and a new way to present the product. So from really difficult times, maybe we've found some innovation that we can carry forward.
You mentioned esports and engaging with fans. So you know, a lot of people have said that this COVID era has been a big kick up the backside for some sports in terms of being able, you know, having to find new ways to connect or suddenly connect with their fans. Whereas before it tended to be the players. You look at football teams, you know, all of a sudden they have to connect with their fans, whereas it used to be the players. What are some of the ways that you've been engaging with and connecting with the fans?
Well, it's interesting what you say, because in February, I was maybe 5-6 months into my new role, and I presented to our board, and I talked a lot about the need to fill the valleys. And what I mean by that is we have a car race, a big weekend of hype in a particular market. We generate a lot of heat in that market, and then we disappear for 2 or 3 weeks, and we pop up somewhere else in the world, and we do another race. And the challenge is, how do we retain that engagement on a day-to-day basis? And a lot of that is, I'm sure, some of the themes that the conference will talk about, right, in terms of digital media, in terms of gaming, in terms of new content platforms, in terms of giving a voice for our drivers and showcasing them, showcasing the technologies that our teams are developing. So that was part of the plan anyway, and we were saying internally we need to dedicate some resource to that. All of a sudden we found ourselves at the end of the March. We didn't have the peaks anymore either. And so then it just became a question of, okay, how do we accelerate some of these themes, as you say, we knew we needed to do anyway. And perhaps, you know, the silver lining here is we had the impetus to do it and the necessity. So, you know, to use that example of our esports series, we weren't the first one. You know, I'll be honest, we weren't prepared. Other platforms have proven games that people have been playing already, and they were able to plug into those. We said, okay, well, if we can't be first, how do we stand out as a property? How do we stand out not only from other sports or other motorsports, but generally speaking, what's happening in the world? In motorsport, what was happening was you had a number of high-profile drivers competing against generally celebrities and other athletes. So we said, well, we want to distinguish by making it our product, meaning it's all the Formula E teams, everyone's going to participate. It's all the drivers, everyone's going to participate. And then we're going to have a parallel, what we call the challenge grid. So within an hour broadcast, we would have 2 races, one for the pros and one for gamers. And the idea was the winner of the gamer series would win the opportunity to try out a real drive in the Formula E car next season. And so that was really an effort to kind of connect the real world and the gaming world, if you will, but equally keep the products separate. And you know, from the feedback we've had in terms of the media exposure, the digital engagement, and then, you know, frankly, just the simple thing like the teams and drivers who originally said, you know what, we're not sure we want to do this, are now asking us when season 2 starts. So, you know, to me, that says a lot about, you know, the importance of the platform, even for the professional drivers who, you know, their day job is, of course, driving real cars, not simulators.
So, and just once again, we will be asking you some questions from the floor in a little bit. So please do get your questions in so we can ask them. And Jamie, we talked about how Formula E has evolved in terms of your fans and in terms of some of the drivers and what have you. But how has the role of CEO evolved in a very short space of time? But how has your role evolved?
Yeah, so I mean, just truth be told, I'm a first-time CEO, so very much trial by fire. And, you know, in general terms, you know, my plan, if you will, my objectives coming into the season were, you know, pretty specific to Formula E. And you know, one was to align with our founder, Alejandro, who's chairman and very active and a big visionary and intrinsically associated with our product. So really to partner with him. 2, build on the foundations of the team. You know, what they had delivered in 5 years is really remarkable in terms of having races in 14 cities around the world and all the teams and manufacturers we talked about before. So it was far from a turnaround, right? It was really, how do you take this really cool thing and make it much bigger than it is today? And that was about, you know, building and hiring a team, clarifying a vision, and then dealing with crisis and challenges. And I think the last, I would say a couple things. You know, one, hiring a team over Zoom. I've hired 5 new executives who, at the time of hiring, I hadn't actually shook their hand or had the dinner or done any of these typical tests that people rely on to hire. I actually think it's a great thing because it's a great equalizer, right? A lot of the biases you might have by meeting someone for a drink or a dinner go away. You really stand on the merits of what you're saying over these platforms. Number two, COVID. I don't think we need to say too much more. I mean, it's massively disruptive, and that's about managing through unpredictability. And then in our world, in the sports world, I think there's been a really heightened, well, in society generally, a heightened awareness around, the inequities of racism and discrimination. And I think the shift that's happened is, sports properties recognizing that, we have a role to play in using our platform to communicate our views on that and to serve as a platform for perhaps a better future. That was definitely not, part of the business plan, but that was very much a topic that was critical in the last 3 months.
So we talked about Formula E, we talked about fan engagement, we talked about your evolution as well in a short space of time. Now, obviously, partners are very important to Formula E. Your shirt would suggest that your partners are very important to Formula E. Tell me, take us through how you've been working with them through the last few months, and have they all stayed on board? Are you, how have you approached partnerships during the COVID period where you don't have hundreds of thousands of fans turning up to races?
I will ask you for a media report on the exposure that I'm generating for these brands here on my shirt. Yeah, de minimis, I suspect, more because of me than the platform. No, look, Formula E is like any other sports platform in the sense that our business model is predicated on building an audience, delivering events, and then commercializing that either through ticketing, hospitality, sponsorship, media rights, content, licensing partnerships, et cetera. Where we're different in terms of the relative share of those streams is, we don't have 150 years of history. And so we skew a little lower on, I wouldn't say necessarily attendance. For example, in Mexico City, we raced in February, had 45,000 people at the event. But the ticket price point, et cetera, ticketing is a relatively smaller part of our business. And then media rights were nascent, right? So we're really in growth mode now, and we lean really heavily into digital platforms in particular to drive exposure. So the sponsors are really the primary source of our income and our lifeblood as a business. And the nice thing with Formula E is, because it was founded with this core purpose around using electric vehicles as a tool to tell a story around climate change. The brands who are partners with us really lean into the association. And, of course, there's media value, and there are activations, and there are creative campaigns that we run with them. But that affinity with some important values around technology, innovation, progress, and then also sustainability, those are big themes in marketing. And so our sponsors have been very supportive. That being said, they are also commercial entities who expect a return. And one of the things we did very quickly with Race at Home, which was our esports series, was we said, okay, we're going to make sure that it replicates a real Formula E environment. So our sponsors are going to have access and visibility within that. And without listing off what we did with each one, we looked at each of their businesses and we said, how can we create a specific digital package around this esports series that we're going to provide to you effectively free of cost as a way to deliver incremental value in the context of not being able to deliver our live product. And we probably could have been a little more aggressive and asked for incremental euros and dollars for that, but we really felt that partnerships in particular, it's a repeating game, as many of you in the audience I'm sure know. There's the rational side, there's an emotional side, and then there are the relationships. And we took the view that treating our partners well in this context would hopefully pay off in the medium term, which I believe it will.
Okay, so first question, and I'm not sure if if you can answer this or not, from Yitze. When is Tesla going to be sending a team to Formula E?
This is not the first time I've been asked that question. It's a good question. So Tesla, a couple things. I mean, I guess officially we would love to have them in the series, and we have had conversations with them. But it is worth pointing out that there's a technical reason actually, as opposed to perhaps a commercial or a brand reason why Tesla is not part of Formula E at the moment. As part of our, if you will, founding principle around motorsport was, for those of you who are not familiar with motorsport, it tends to be really expensive, right? I mean, you hear about the numbers with F1 or other motorsports, a lot of money is spent in developing these cars. And so what we said is, we have to have a viable sport. We have to have a business model that makes sense. And what we're going to try to do is minimize the cost of putting a car on the track. And so in really simple terms, about 95% of a Formula E car is standard. What is differentiated is the powertrain. So a Mercedes is not the same as a Porsche underneath the hood, so to speak. What is the same, though, is the battery. And everyone uses the same battery. And the idea there is we are able to get economies of scale on the development costs of the battery, and therefore much more cost effective and also more egalitarian in terms of differentiating on the powertrain and the software that pushes the car forward. Tesla, as I'm sure many of you know, differentiate specifically by their investment in their battery platform. And so there's a bit of a philosophical difference there, which is the main reason they're not part of the championship.
That's a very technical answer, and I actually understood it. I was pleased to hear.
Well, I would say, going forward, one of the questions we get from our manufacturers is what pieces of the car should be customized and what should be standardized. And you touched on the partners just very quickly, Jasper. I spent a lot of time with our manufacturer partners this spring looking at R&D budgets. Which part of the car should be differentiated that would help them tell a story as to why you might want to buy a Mercedes versus a Jaguar versus a Mahindra, okay? And it turns out that something like shock absorbers or dampers in British terminology isn't. And so, they might spend money to have a slightly differentiated piece of performance, but we'll customize. The batteries is something that gets asked all the time. And, Porsche is differentiated with the Taycan on the battery, and they ask that question. So you never know in the future.
Surely the car stereo and CD is the decision maker. Okay, we've got a question from Christina Kosciuszko. What learnings or advice would you offer to the football community now that you've been working in Formula E? What learnings for the football community? So all your old mates.
But I guess the first thing to say is football has some attributes that we would love to have, right? In terms of the passion of the fans, the history, how embedded football is in societies, whether it's in Europe where it's home or whether you're in Asia. And for those of you in Singapore, I used to always say this, a United fan in Singapore is no less passionate than a United fan in Salford. And so, what football has is really special. And I think what you saw this spring was a big change in terms of how football has leveraged its platform for good. And so you've seen things like Man United launching a women's team in the last couple of years, really getting behind questions around gay rights around wearing rainbow laces, and some of that is symbolic, but some of it is more substantive. And then there are the player-led initiatives this spring around end racism. And so, to me, what football actually has hit a bit of an inflection point. I would have said, if I had that question a year ago, I might have said, are they leveraging their platform as much as they can, given the reach and the passion that their fans have. And I think they've done a nice job in the last 6-12 months, really pushing that forward. I would say from my experience in the NFL and motorsport, one thing where football really can improve is the guest experience at the events themselves. Now that's not very relevant perhaps in COVID environment, but if you've been to an NFL game, if you've been to a motorsport event, certainly on the premium hospitality side, the way the guests are looked after, the behind the scenes experiences that the guests are able to achieve, and Jasper, from Singapore with the Grand Prix, they do an amazing job. It really is different than football, and football has the potential to do that, right? I mean, going in and seeing what it's like to train at Arsenal, or being in a room where you can look into the locker room at Chelsea. I mean, those are all things that they could open up if they wanted to. So I think they could maybe take a page out of motorsport in that regard.
So we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I wanted to. So you've talked about a little bit about what the season might look like next year, and obviously things may well change. But you have a global role. You're currently in Hong Kong. So what excites you the most about Asia Pacific?
Well, on a personal level, I love living here. So I'm a huge fan, and APAC. I always feel sort of awkward talking about it as a Westerner who's only lived here for a short period of time. But the heterogeneity of the cultures and the markets is what makes it fascinating, but also incredibly challenging. And I think from a business perspective, why many Western entities miss, because they call it Asia Pacific instead of having a country by country strategy. For us as Formula E, and I guess by extension for my role, I mean, we believe we're addressing a global challenge, right? Climate change is not a geographic issue. Maybe it's amplified in certain places, but generally speaking, it's a global issue. And by the way, it's tied directly to economic development, which is what you see, playing out perhaps geopolitically around, emission standards and things like that. And so, from a Formula E perspective, what's interesting is you think about a market like Indonesia, where we were meant to be racing this year before COVID, and very few people on a relative basis have a car. I suspect to the extent that Indonesia develops economically, a little bit like mobile jumping ahead of fixed line broadband, you will see people, their first and only car will be electric, right? So for me and for our stakeholders, these markets are really important in terms of consumer development. And then also, the more advanced economies, we were also supposed to race in Seoul. Seoul positions itself as a smart city. Really, you feel like you're living in the future when you go to Seoul. A lot of the themes that our car companies really care about in terms of autonomous and connected mobility, all these things are likely to play out in markets like Korea before they do, in the West. And so, for us, it's absolutely critical to be here. And our founder, I think, saw that in 2014 when he hosted the first race in Beijing. I mean, that was not an accident.
So just a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to move completely away from Formula E and more into Jamie Reigle. But two of my favorite questions at the moment. What are you doing now that you weren't doing before COVID?
Yoga. So I
You can't answer it with a one-word question. That's not.
No, I know. We spoke about this before. No, look, I've done 2 quarantines. And Jasper knows this because we see each other in Whistler in Canada every once in a while. I love to mountain bike. I love to run. I love the outdoors. And what the last 6 months has done is it's shrunk your world, right? It's made it right here. And for me, if you told me I'd be doing yoga and using a training app 6 months ago, I would have laughed. And yet I love it. And I don't say that flippantly as, oh, it's yoga. I think the concept of being able to adapt yourself to stay sane and stay happy in these environments and try to still be productive at work is really important. That's helped me.
Okay, and then the final question we love to ask everyone, and we asked Cookie Monster earlier, I'm going to ask you the same, is what advice would you give your younger or your 15-year-old self?
It's funny. I mean, I have a 7-year-old, and I feel like I need to call my dad and ask him what kind of advice he gave, because I don't know whether it worked or not, but my 7-year-old is not taking any of mine. Look, get a little bit emotional here. One of the things that was really important to me as a kid, I grew up in Canada, and I used to go canoeing with my dad every year. And for those of you who've been to Canada, there's a lot of lakes. And my dad's idea of a good time was not seeing another human being for 5 or 6 days. And we would go 2, 3, 4 hours north of where I lived, which is already a couple hours north of Montreal. And we would show up and there'd be 2 cars in the parking lot. One would have New York plates and it would say, my dad would say, "Oh God, the Americans have discovered this place." And I was thinking, I'm going to be in the woods for 6 days, pre-cell phone. No one knows where I am. And we, I used to do those every year and I don't do them anymore. And they sort of stopped around 15, 16 because I was a teenager and then I went to uni and then I flew around the world and did this career and I miss it. And I think what this crisis or this pandemic has taught us is, you need to take time for yourself because things can change really dramatically quickly that you lose control of, what's important.
Some very, very wise words there, Jamie. I think we could carry on talking for a long time, but unfortunately our time is up. Listen, we talked about purpose. You mentioned we're all in it together and where purpose fits in Formula E and is the heart of Formula E. We talked about adapting and being flexible. You mentioned that it has been somewhat of a trial by fire. I mean, it really has for you. But it looks like you're thriving on it. As your first CEO role, I have to say congratulations to you and thank you so much again for joining. Good luck with the 7th season. I hope we can all physically see you in Santiago. I've never been to Santiago before, so I'll send you my address for the invitation, and we will see you in Santiago in January. But Jamie Reigle, CEO of Formula E, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me, Jasper. And I think we're hanging around to do some Q&A, or at least if that is of interest, I am here. So thank you very much, everyone.